Bubbles, you let me in. You're gonna make me log into my own website? Alright, Bubbles. You get that? What? What? Alright, you know what, Bubbles? Just let me in. What is up, everyone, and welcome to another video. Before we hit the computer and start coding, hit that subscribe button down below, leave a like if you're enjoying the content, and drop a comment, let me know what you want to see coded up next. Now, in this video, we're on episode 19 of our Hello World series. We are coding up the backend validation for our login form. In the last video, we coded up the front-end validation for our login form. Now we're going to pass that same front-end validation object from the front end to the back end and validate it on the back end as well, along with a few extra checks because we need to make sure that the email address entered, first of all, exists in the database, and second of all, the password entered matches that email address that exists in the database. And then once we've validated all that on the back end, we're going to send that to the front end, where the front end will then respond to the back end validation. So on the front end, we'll run those checks again to see if the email address and password validated on the back end. If they did, we can log the user in. If they didn't, we need to highlight those input boxes red again, and the user needs to try to log in again. As always, links will be in the description below to things like the GitHub repository, the live website where you can see this code in action, and where's Bubbles? I will see you on the computer. Welcome to Hello World episode 19, login form backend validation. We're going to pick up where we left off in our last video where we validated the front end, and we're going to pass that data along to our backend for further validation. Now, before we start coding, we need to get our code base set up on our local environment. Over here at github.com/jstolpe/helloworld is our repository that we are working out of. Here's the homepage for the repository, and the README here gives you a little overview of the project, and you can see the YouTube episodes playlist here, starting from episode 1 if you've missed any episodes, and then the live site here. Let's open this in a new tab. There is our Hello World website. In this video, we're going to be updating this login form. So when we click the login button, the front end data gets validated on the back end. Over in my www folder, I have my Hello World repository checked out into my Hello World folder. And we need to make sure we have our database set up as well. In our case here, I'm over on PHP my admin in my Hello World database, and we have one table, our users table. And here's our user back from our sign up episode. With our code all set up, we need to make sure that we are checking out a new branch for this episode. Get branch -a. You can see all the previous episodes here if you want to check out the code at any of those episodes and watch the video on them. Go check those out. Otherwise, they get merged back into main at the end. Do a clear, and we're going to create a branch. Get checkout -b episode 19 login back end validation. Check that out, and now we are on our new branch. Get branch -a. Our branch that we just created is starred. We are on our episode 19 branch. We're ready to code. And we're going to begin over in our assets, JavaScript, login, script.js file. Here's where we left off last time. Our server login. We validated the front end. If it's valid, we're going to do server-side validation right here. It's going to be very similar to our signup Ajax call in our signup script.js file. Down here, we did the same thing. We validated our front-end signup form, and then did our server-side call right here. So we're going to copy our signup right over here to our login. The first thing we do is we're going to show our loader to take over the screen with our logo spinning, and then we're going to make our Ajax call right here. To post, we're going to make our Ajax call to Hello World login/user because we're logging them in this time, so we're going to set up that endpoint, and then we're going to pass along our login form data. And that get post data just gets all the data from the login form, stores it in our form data object right here. And then we have our success function right here, which is once our endpoint right here, login/user, has validated our data on the back end, it's going to return to the success function right here. So we want to, again, call our login form .validate response data. Our front end is going to update our UI with what came back from the back end, and we're going to do an alert valid. And we want to make sure that we also hide our loader. The other thing we need to update here is our hard-coded full endpoint right here. We don't want to hard-code all of this because on different servers, we're going to have different domains. It's not always going to be localhost. So we're going to get rid of everything up until our controller function. The same thing over here in our signup Ajax call as well, because now in our templates default script.js file, in our last video we implemented our base URL here. So now we're storing our base URL, which gets set over here in our views, templates default HTML. Our base URL right here is the link to our website. So if we're on localhost, it's going to be localhost. If we're on a domain, it'll be the domain. So now all we have to do is call hello world.base URL. and do the same thing for our login. And that is how we're going to pass along our data to the backend with an Ajax call right here. So now we have to set up our backend. First thing we need is our login controller. App, controllers, login. So we have our login controller, which takes care of displaying the view out to the user, but we need to add a function in here now called user, because we're targeting the user function that needs to exist in our login controller. And again, this is very similar to our signup.php controller. So we're going to copy our user function from our signup controller into our login controller. And we're going to get our form data from the post form data, which is passed along from our Ajax call right over here, form data. And then we're going to log the user in our login model. That's where we're going to take care of validating the form data. So login model dash user function, and we're going to pass along our form data. And once that has been validated, we're going to echo out that form data right back to the front end right here, where we will then call our login form validate response data on the object once again. So up one level in our models folder, we need to create a login model because we don't yet have one. We're going to copy our signup model and rename it login model. And over in our login model here, we have to update our class to be login model. And just like the sign up again, we have our function user, which we're calling from our login controller right here. So we'll fall right into this user function right here. Now the first thing we need to do is validate the form data that we're getting. So just like our sign up form, we're going to do a validate login form and pass along our form data. We're going to copy that function name, and we'll update this function right here, validate login form, passing in the form data by reference, so any updates we make to the form data inside this function will last when we get back up here and continue on. And I'm just going to clear out all of this stuff from the signup validation because we're going to start fresh, and I'm going to clear out the rest of the functions in here as well. Clean things up a little bit. Now before we go ahead and start validating our login form, I feel like this is a good place. Let's just print out our form data here. This way we can open the site in a browser and make sure we're actually making it all the way here without getting any errors. We should see the form data printed out in our network tab in the response. Over at localhost hello world/login, hit that F12 button here, network tab, and let's put in an email and then a password. Now remember, these things have to be a valid email structure, and the password has to be at least 8 characters for this to fire an event off to the back end for validation. Otherwise, the front end just takes care of validating it on its own. So I'm going to click login here, and we should see another line item here in the network tab. There it is. Our user function has been called. And if we click on this in the response tab, we should see our request. There is our request. You see our form elements. Everything that the front end validated has now been passed to the back end, and we have an array that is exactly the same as it was on the front end. We have our email address here, h@h.com value, and our password value right there as well is passed along to the back end. So we're on the right track. We have no errors up until this point right here, and we can go ahead and validate the form data. Now the first thing we want to do is check the email address. So we're going to get the user's info from the database with their email address. And to do this, we're going to call our users model, open up our users model, and we're going to call our get user with column value. What we have to do here is specify the column and the value we want to get, and the column is going to be email. The value is going to be our form data, form elements, email, value. So we're going to query the database for this value right here in the email column. Here's our form elements email value, h@h.com. Over in our PHP we will be querying the users table here for an email address in the email column with h@h.com. Now we can write our if statement here. If we have the user's info with email, that means the email address matched. Else, we know it didn't match. We're going to create a boolean here. We're going to say is log in form valid. And here we got user's info, so we're going to say true. Else, false, because we didn't find the email address. So right now we will be falling into this false because h@h.com doesn't exist as an email in our database. Now, the user info with email, that's great if it exists, but we also have to make sure that the password matches what they've entered. So if we have a user's info with email and their password that they entered in the form matches what we have in the database, then we can set this to true. To validate the password, we call password verify, and the first input here is the password we want to check against. In our case, we want to call our form data, form elements, password, value. And we want to check that against the hash of the password that is in our database, because this password verify function, PHP function, will take care of checking our plain text password versus the hashed password in our database. Alright, so now our user's info with email array, if we have a row in here, so if we've entered hello world in the front end, we will return this row. Then we need to check our password here, the hashed one in the database, and make sure that it matches the value entered in the front end. If both those things are true, then we can say our login form is valid and the user can log in. Now to make the front end happy, our front end object form helper, we have to update our form elements here accordingly. So we're going to set our form elements email is valid, and we're going to set this equal to our boolean here, is login form valid. Do the same thing for the password. If one of them is incorrect, we're going to mark them both incorrect, and then on the front end, it's going to read our is valid boolean right here, and it's going to give them both red borders. Now we're going to call our form helper function on our form as a whole, and set our form is valid boolean as a whole. And so we're going to call our form helper model over here, specifically our is form valid. What this does is it loops over every element that is in the form, and if any element is false, the whole form gets marked as invalid. Form helper model is form valid, and the parameter is our form data. And then all we have to do is return an array, and we're going to return the user info. We're going to return whatever we got back from our call to our users model right here, the users info with email array. And so back up here, we can continue on now. If our form data form is valid, the boolean we just set on the entire form, then we can do stuff to log the user in. Otherwise, we're just going to return the form data back to the front end, and it will update accordingly. Clear out this stuff right here. This is all stuff that was for signing a user up. All right, let's clear out our other echo over here in our validate login form, clean up a little bit here. Let's echo out our form data right here. We're going to see what our validate form function has done to our form data. h@h.com with a password again. Email is going to validate on the front end because it's a valid structure and the password has enough characters. We're going to click login. It has been sent to the backend. We know that because it fired off our Ajax call right here to our users function in our login controller. And now the response is a nice JSON formatted response sent back from our controller. And indeed, we can expand our form elements, email, and password here, and it is false. So as password, it's false, and our form is valid as a whole is also false. Now let's try an actual email address. helloworld.com with our password. Now these two actually match what is over here in our database, email and password. And so if we click login, our alert should happen this time because the front end has received the data from the back end. The data from the back end has said everything checks out and is valid. Click login. There we go, we get the pop-up saying valid, and let's now expand our user's request again. And now the form elements, you see the email is true, password is true, the form is valid as a whole is marked as true. And of course, clicking OK does nothing because we're going to wrap up our login form backend validation right there. And so in our next video, we're going to go over session handling and storing the session in the database. We're going to store the session in the database. This way we can look up the session on each page request that the user makes, so we can tell if the user is logged in or not as they jump to different pages across our site. And that is going to wrap up this video, Hello World episode 19, login form backend validation. We have validated the form data we got from the front end. We've looked up to see if their email exists in the database. We've also made sure that the password validates, and if those two things match, we know the user can be logged in. Otherwise, we know the user got the credentials wrong and they should not be logged in. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you want to see coded up next. I'll catch you later.